Welcome back to Into the Paradox, everyone. Today, we're diving into a topic that feels less like a distant threat and more like a looming shadow over the UK. The escalating issue of droughts, what it means for civil society, and some of the more unsettling scenarios that could arise. Anastasia, let's start with the basics. The UK isn't exactly known for its arid landscapes, is it? What's really going on with these droughts?
You're right, Peter. When people think of the UK, they usually picture rain. But what we're seeing now is a concerning trend of prolonged dry spells, especially in certain regions like the South East and East Anglia. It's not just a lack of rain, it's also about hotter summers increasing evaporation and older infrastructure struggling to cope. Historically, we've had droughts, of course, but the frequency and intensity are shifting. It's putting immense pressure on our water supply, which then cascades into agriculture, ecosystems, and eventually, public life.
Pressure on public life, that's a key phrase, I think. Martin, from your perspective, when you hear drought and pressure, what sort of immediate societal shifts or anxieties come to mind? Are people already connecting the dots to larger state control or resource battles?
Absolutely, Peter. The moment you start talking about water scarcity, you're talking about control. Historically, water has always been a battleground. For many, it's not just a natural phenomenon anymore. There's a growing sentiment, especially in certain circles, that these events could be either exacerbated or even, dare I say, managed to justify increased state intervention. We're already seeing discussions around water metering restrictions, but then people start asking, who owns the rivers? Who controls the reservoirs? And that's where the idea of securing resources, not just for the public good, but for strategic advantage, really takes root. It plays into ancient fears, too, of the powerful hoarding essential elements.
And that fear, Martin, is fertile ground for more extreme responses. When people feel their fundamental needs are threatened, social cohesion starts to fray. We've seen it throughout history. Scarcity breeds suspicion, and suspicion can easily morph into panic or even targeted aggression. If the state is perceived as failing to provide, or worse, actively controlling access to essential resources like water, you could see a rapid erosion of trust in institutions. That's a dangerous path because it opens the door for charismatic figures or fringe groups to offer solutions that are anything but. So we're talking about civil unrest from a police state mandate. Let's really lean into that. If droughts worsen and water becomes incredibly scarce, what might a mandate look like, and how would the public react? Anastasia, from a historical perspective, have we seen states try to control such vital resources to this extent?
Absolutely, Peter. Water control is as old as civilization itself. Ancient empires built intricate aqueducts and canals, not just for convenience but for power. Historically, when resources became scarce, states often responded with highly centralized control, sometimes with strict rationing, fines, or even military oversight to prevent hoarding or diversion. In terms of public reaction, it's a spectrum. You'll see compliance out of necessity, certainly, but you'll also see outrage, black markets emerging, and indeed civil disobedience. The mandates could range from simple hosepipe bans escalating to limits on personal consumption, perhaps even restrictions on certain industries if water becomes critical. The key factor is how equitably these mandates are perceived to be enforced. Perceived unfairness is a huge catalyst for unrest.
And that perceived unfairness is exactly what feeds the conspiracy narrative. If a major corporation still gets to irrigate its vast fields while ordinary citizens are struggling to water their gardens, people will ask questions. They'll start looking for the hidden hand, the deep state agenda. What if the droughts aren't just natural, but a convenient crisis to implement more surveillance, more control over movement, more mandates that supposedly keep us safe but actually strip away freedoms? This is where the prepper mentality really takes hold too. People stop trusting the system to protect them.
Fair yesternight the daughts. Who is such Johnnies? That's a great segue, Martin. Prepper culture has definitely grown in the UK. Tom, from your perspective as a cult and crime specialist, how does this prepper movement evolve when the perceived threat shifts from abstract, long-term disaster to immediate, tangible crisis like water scarcity and potential state overreach? Are we seeing more organized groups, or is it still largely individualistic?
It's both, Peter, but the collective aspect is definitely increasing. Initially, prepping might have been about individual families squirreling away food and water. But as the perceived threats become more systemic, like a breakdown of law and order, or a state seen as turning authoritarian, people naturally look for community, for strength in numbers. That's where you see the formation of what would be called survivalist communities or even mutual aid groups, though some can veer into more insular, cult-like structures if led by the wrong individuals. They might pool resources, establish their own security, and essentially try to create their own micro-societies outside of what they perceive as a failing or oppressive system. This can be benign, but it can also become breeding ground for extremism or even vigilante groups, especially if resources like water or land become targets.
And historically, this isn't new either. Times of great societal stress, famine, war, plague, have always seen the rise of these kinds of groups. Sometimes they provide genuine support and innovation, and sometimes they devolve into exploitation and insularity. It's a very human response to an existential threat. What's different now is the interconnectedness, the speed at which information and misinformation can spread, amplifying both the fear and the calls for collective action, for better or worse.
So let's talk about securing resources then. If the state is looking at reservoirs and rivers, and communities are looking at their own local water sources, how does that play out? And Martin, what are the whispers you're hearing about who might be trying to secure these vital resources beyond the immediate need?
The whispers, Peter, are that securing resources isn't just about ensuring public supply, but about strategic control. Why are certain large landholders, often with opaque ownership structures, buying up vast tracts of land that encompass significant natural springs or stretches of river? Is it just for agricultural development, or is there a longer-term play for water rights? And when the government talks about national security in the context of water, some interpret that as a move towards highly militarized control of infrastructure, major dams, treatment plants, distribution networks. The idea is that in a crisis, these become critical national assets, and any perceived threat to them, from civil unrest to even foreign actors, could justify a lockdown, essentially turning water access into a privilege controlled by the state rather than a universal right.
And that brings us back to the potential for crime. If water becomes highly controlled and scarce, you're going to see a black market for it. Water theft, illegal diversions, even potentially armed conflicts over local water sources. Imagine rural communities desperate for water, clashing with corporate security protecting a secured lake, or organised crime moving into the water supply chain. That's a very real scenario when something fundamental becomes a commodity in short supply. It's no longer about petty theft, it becomes about survival, and the stakes are incredibly high.
That's a truly chilling prospect, Tom. Now, we've touched on internal pressures, but the topic also mentioned something very specific and contentious: migrants invading coastal areas. This isn't just about water, is it? It's about a complex interplay of resource scarcity, perceived threats, and perhaps even engineered panic. Anastasia, what does history tell us about large-scale population movements in times of crisis, and how states and populations react?
This is a deeply sensitive area, Peter. Historically, environmental changes, droughts, floods, desertification have always been major drivers of migration. People move to survive. When we talk about migrants invading coastal areas, we're often talking about people fleeing unlivable conditions, seeking safety and resources. The reaction to these movements historically has varied wildly. Sometimes it's been assimilation, other times it's been conflict, and frequently it's been a mix of fear, xenophobia and humanitarian response. In the context of the UK, with its island geography, any large-scale arrival by sea is visually impactful and can be easily sensationalized, especially by media or political actors seeking to exploit public anxieties about resource strain, national identity, or security. It exacerbates the us versus them narrative, which can then be used to justify even stricter border controls or internal mandates, further pushing towards that police state scenario we discussed.
And this is precisely where the grand narratives, the conspiracies, start to weave together. For some, the migrant invasion isn't just a natural consequence of global instability, it's a planned event. A great replacement theory, or a deliberate destabilization tactic by unnamed global elites designed to further erode national sovereignty and create chaos that can then be solved by an authoritarian state. They'll connect it to the droughts, saying, why aren't we securing our own water for our own people, instead of dealing with these new arrivals? It feeds into a very dangerous feedback loop of fear, blame, and a rejection of any nuanced understanding.
And that rejection of nuance, Martin, is what I see weaponized into hate speech and incitement. When you combine resource scarcity with a perceived invasion and a narrative of state failure or conspiracy, you create a fertile ground for extremist groups. They'll exploit these anxieties, offering simple, often violent solutions. They might advocate for self-styled militias to protect coastal borders or local resources. You could see an increase in hate crimes, vigilantism, and a general breakdown of law and order in areas perceived to be on the front lines of this invasion. The line between self-preservation and outright aggression becomes very, very blurry.
So, we're painting a pretty stark picture here. We've got environmental collapse leading to water scarcity, which fuels a prepper movement, creates the conditions for civil unrest under potential police-state mandates, intensifies the battle for critical resources like lakes and rivers, and then layers on top of that the complex and potentially volatile issue of migration, all wrapped up in a package of fear, conspiracy, and potential crime. It's a lot to digest. Anastasia, looking at the entire tapestry we've woven today, are there any historical examples where societies have successfully navigated such a perfect storm of challenges, or are we truly in uncharted territory?
That's the million-dollar question, Peter. No single historical parallel perfectly captures all these elements at once, especially with modern population densities and global interconnectedness. However, what history does show us are certain constants. Societies that adapt best tend to be those with strong, legitimate institutions that foster trust, those that prioritize equitable resource distribution, and those that can find innovative solutions rather than relying solely on control and coercion. Open dialogue, scientific collaboration, and a willingness to understand the root causes of migration, rather than just reacting to symptoms, are crucial. The moments of successful navigation are often marked by a societal decision to face the challenge collectively and with a degree of empathy, even when it's difficult. It's a choice between fragmentation and collaboration.
And collaboration, Anastasia, often means questioning the official narrative, understanding who benefits from the fear, and pushing for transparency from those in power. If people feel like they're being told one thing while seeing another, the cracks in society will widen, regardless of how dire the environmental situation becomes. It's about empowering people with genuine information and alternatives, not just mandates.
Exactly, because when that trust is gone, when people feel disempowered and manipulated, that's when the really dangerous stuff starts to happen. That's when ordinary people can be drawn into extraordinary, often destructive actions. A strong community, built on trust and shared values, is ultimately the best defense against both societal collapse and the exploitative forces that thrive in chaos.
Powerful insights from all of you today. It's clear that the path ahead for the UK, grappling with these converging crises, is complex and fraught with potential dangers. But as Anastasia highlighted, there's always a choice, and perhaps in understanding the paradoxes, we can better navigate them. Tom, Martin, Anastasia, thank you all for shedding light on such a vital and at times unsettling topic. And thank you to our listeners for joining us once again on Into the Paradox. We'll see you next time.